In court, my parents claimed that I was immature and couldn't handle money. Their lawyer grinned, as if everything had already been decided. They wanted my bank account, my car, even the apartment I had paid for myself. Then the bailiff opened his folder and began to read out the list. At the third item, the judge suddenly recoiled, his eyes wide open. "Stop immediately. Get security in here," he shouted, and my parents froze. The oxygen left the room as blue uniforms blurred past the heavy oak doors. The silence was a physical weight against my chest. My mother adjusted her silk scarf with trembling fingers. She refused to look at the dark wood of the defense table where I sat. My father stared at the judge with a mask of practiced concern. He had spent 30 years perfecting that look of paternal disappointment. It was his greatest weapon. Beside them, Arthur Vance tapped a gold pen against a leather legal pad. The rhythmic sound felt like a countdown. He did not know the timer was already empty. The bailiff stood perfectly still near the witness stand. He clutched the manila folder as if it were a live wire. 2 officers moved to flank my father while a third blocked the primary exit. The judge leaned over his bench and gestured for the paper. His intelligent eyes scanned the text with a look of dawning horror. I watched the subtle twitch in his jaw. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. My parents shared a quick, confused glance that lacked their usual confidence. 8 years of quiet labor sat inside that folder. I remembered the nights spent in a shared apartment eating cold soup. I saved every cent while working as a lowly assistant at the Historical Society. My parents assumed I was failing because I didn't ask for help. They viewed my silence as a prolonged tantrum. In reality, I was building a fortress of assets they could never comprehend. I had learned to value the hidden things. Now, those secret choices were finally coming into the harsh public light. Robert Frost was a master of the corporate game. He believed my archival degree was a pathetic defect. At family dinners, he pushed brochures for business schools across the table. My mother would smile at her nail polish and tell me he knew best. They wanted a daughter they could manage like a portfolio. When I finally walked away, they laughed. They were certain I would come crawling back within months. They never suspected I had already discovered the first rare journal in a dusty estate sale. Miranda Shaw, my attorney, stood up with surgical precision. She did not raise her voice. She simply pointed at the parents who had tried to erase my autonomy. She spoke of the malpractice suit currently drowning my father's firm. The courtroom shifted as the predator became the prey. My father's knuckles turned white against the mahogany table. He had refinanced their colonial home 3 times to hide the rot. They weren't here to save me from myself. They were here to survive by drowning me instead. The judge looked at the bailiff and nodded slowly. The reading resumed with a voice like dry gravel. Item 4 was my vintage Mustang, a project I had restored in a rented garage. Item 5 was a diversified municipal bond portfolio, worth $500,000. My father's head snapped toward me with wide, hungry eyes. He saw the numbers and realized I was worth more than his entire firm. The mask of concern shattered into pure, naked avarice. He stood up and pointed a shaking finger at my throat. It was his final mistake. The officers closed the distance before he could finish his roar. My mother began to sob, but the tears were no longer performative. They were the harsh sounds of a woman realizing the life raft was sailing away. The judge hammered his gavel with a sound like a gunshot. He dismissed the petition with prejudice and ordered a full inquiry into their motives. I stood up and smoothed my navy dress. I walked past them without saying a word. I left the silver oak leaf pendant on the table. The cool air of the courthouse hallway felt like a shield against the suffocating tension I had left behind. Miranda walked beside me with the steady stride of a conqueror, her heels clicking a rhythmic victory on the marble floor. I didn't look back at the heavy oak doors. I knew my parents were still trapped in that room with the wreckage of their lies. The silence between us was comfortable. A shared understanding of the war we had just won. Yet, a shadow of dread remained. We reached the glass, walled lobby where sunlight cut through the dust in long, sharp blades. Miranda turned to me, her sharp gray eyes assessing my pale face. She didn't offer a hug or a platitude. Instead, she handed me a heavy brass key. It was the key to my rented garage, the place where my secret life had lived for years. She told me to go there and find my anchor, before the reporters arrived. I thanked her, my voice finally finding its steady ground again. The drive across the city felt surreal and slow. Every stoplight was an eternity, while the adrenaline drained from my limbs, leaving a hollow ache. I navigated through the industrial district, where the buildings were tall and scared by soot. My sensible sedan seemed out of place among the rusted trucks and chain-link fences. I pulled up to the corrugated metal door of Unit 24. My hand shook as I slid the brass key into the lock. The heavy door groaned open. Inside the dim space, the scent of motor oil and old leather greeted me like a forgotten friend. I pulled back the soft canvas cover to reveal the forest green paint of the '65 Mustang. It was a masterpiece of chrome and steel that my parents had never seen. I ran my fingers over the flawless fender, feeling the cool metal. This car was my rebellion. A testament to years of careful saving and hidden labor. It was tangible proof that I belonged to myself. I climbed into the driver's seat and closed the door with a solid thud. The interior was a sanctuary of mechanical simplicity. I wasn't an archivist here. I was a mechanic who had rebuilt an engine with her own bloodied knuckles. I gripped the thin steering wheel and closed my eyes. For a moment, I could almost hear my father's roar from the courtroom echoing in the rafters. He had called me deceitful, but he had never bothered to learn my truth. A sudden flash of light in my rearview mirror made me stiffen. A dark SUV had pulled into the alley, blocking my exit path. My heart hammered against my ribs as a man stepped out of the vehicle. He wasn't a reporter. He wore the same dark uniform as the process server who had started this nightmare weeks ago. He walked toward the open garage door with a purposeful stride. I reached for my phone, but my hands felt like leaden weights. The man stopped at the threshold, his silhouette framed by the harsh afternoon sun. He didn't speak. Instead, he held up a digital tablet displaying a fresh legal injunction. My breath hitched. Miranda had said the war was over, but the Frosts were not people who accepted defeat. They were masters of the technicality and the loophole. He stepped into my private sanctuary, his eyes scanning the Mustang with a cold, professional hunger. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was vengeance. "Miss Frost, I have a secondary filing," he said, his voice as dry as old parchment. He explained that my father had filed a claim against the provenance of my collection. They were accusing me of theft from the family estate to nullify my wealth. It was a desperate, ugly move that ignored the decade of receipts I had stored away. My sanctuary felt suddenly small and exposed. He reached out to touch the car, but I slammed the door open, blocking his path. "Get out," I whispered, my voice sharp and dangerous. He didn't move. He simply pointed to the signature on the bottom of the tablet. It wasn't my father's jagged script. It was my brother Asher's neat, practiced hand. The betrayal cut deeper than any court petition ever could. I had given him a map to save himself, and he had used it to find my vault. I realized then that the foundation I had built was still sitting on shifting, treacherous sand. The server did not flinch as I stood my ground. His eyes remained fixed on the tablet screen, while the rain drummed a frantic rhythm against the metal roof. I felt the phantom weight of my brother's betrayal pressing against my ribs. Asher had always played the golden child, but this was a new level of cruelty. He had traded my secrets for his own financial survival. The Mustang sat behind me like a trapped animal in the dim light of the industrial garage. "This is a civil seizure notice," the man stated calmly. He stepped deeper into the unit, his boots crunching on the stray grit. I reached for the garage door pull, but he blocked the track with a heavy flashlight. My objective was clear. I had to stall him until Miranda could intervene. I pulled my phone out and dialed her number with numb fingers. The call went straight to her busy voicemail. I was alone in the dark with a professional thief. He began photographing the car from multiple angles. The flash of his camera illuminated the forest green paint in sharp, cold bursts. I noticed a small logo on his sleeve that did not match the city sheriff's office. It was a private security firm my father often used for delicate corporate liquidations. This was not a formal court action yet. It was an intimidation tactic designed to bypass the judge's recent dismissal. My parents were trying to steal the evidence before the inquiry began. "You have no jurisdiction here," I said. My voice was sharper than I expected. I watched his hand drift toward a heavy set of bolt cutters in his belt. He ignored me and focused on the vintage odometer. I realized he was looking for proof that the car had been purchased with family funds. He needed a paper trail that did not exist. I had every receipt for every bolt and gasket filed in a safety deposit box. He was fishing in a dry well. I took a step toward the SUV blocking the alleyway. The driver remained behind the tinted glass, a silent shadow watching the scene. I needed to see the full document on that tablet. If I could prove the signature was a forgery, the entire move would collapse. I lunged forward and grabbed the edge of the device. The server gripped my wrist, his strength far exceeding mine. We struggled for a second in the cramped space between the car and the cold metal wall. The tablet fell to the concrete floor with a sickening crack. The screen flickered, revealing a line of text at the very bottom of the filing. It was not a theft claim. It was an emergency lien placed on the property by a secondary creditor. My father had used my name as a guarantor on a loan I never signed. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. He had forged my identity years ago, long before the court case. He did not just steal my future, I whispered. He stole my name. The server looked down at the shattered tablet and then back at me. His professional mask slipped for a fleeting moment, showing a hint of genuine hesitation. He knew a forged guarantee was a criminal matter, not a civil one. I grabbed a heavy iron wrench from my workbench. I was no longer a reclusive archivist. I was a woman defending the only thing she had left. I stepped toward him. The driver of the SUV suddenly opened his door and stepped out. He was not another guard. He was a lawyer I recognized from my father's inner circle. He looked at the shattered tablet and sighed. "This was supposed to be a quiet transition, Hadley," he said. He held out a fresh set of papers. These were not legal forms. They were non-disclosure agreements. They wanted to trade the Mustang for my silence regarding the fraud. They were desperate to stop the judge's inquiry. "The Mustang stays," I said, my grip tightening on the wrench. I looked past him toward the end of the alley. A pair of headlights turned the corner, sweeping across the rusted brick walls. It was Miranda's black sedan, arriving exactly when the stakes had reached their peak. She stepped out of the car with a folder of her own. But as she approached, I saw the look of grim news on her face. My apartment was currently being searched by the police. Someone had reported a crime. The sirens remained silent as Miranda stepped into the garage. Her presence shifted the air like a sudden cold front. She ignored the guards and walked straight to the shattered tablet on the floor. Her eyes moved from the cracked glass to the lawyer in the expensive suit. I saw the fury behind her professional mask. She did not look at the car. She looked at me. The police search at my home was a distraction. It was a play to keep me away. You have 10 seconds to leave this private property, Miranda said. Her voice was a low, dangerous hum. The corporate lawyer tried to offer his non-disclosure agreement again. He claimed the police were looking for stolen archival documents. It was a clever lie designed to hit me where I lived. If my professional integrity was questioned, my career would end. I felt the iron wrench grow heavy in my hand. I was losing the battle for my reputation, while defending a hunk of metal. Miranda held up a small recording device from her pocket. She had caught the lawyer mentioning the forged guarantee on the broken tablet. The power in the room flipped instantly. He realized the threat of criminal prosecution was now real and documented. His smug confidence evaporated into the oily shadows of the garage. He gestured for the guards to retreat to the SUV. They moved quickly, their heavy boots scuffing the concrete. The threat of immediate seizure was over. We were safe. I leaned against the Mustang's fender as the SUV pulled away. My knees finally gave out, and I slid to the floor. The adrenaline left me hollow and shaking in the dark. Miranda didn't offer comfort. She began making rapid calls to her office. We needed to secure my apartment before the police did more damage. They were looking for a specific ledger my father believed I had. It was the key to his entire malpractice defense. I had to reach it first. The ledger was not in my apartment. It was hidden inside the very archives I spent my days protecting. I had discovered it tucked inside a box of unrelated Civil War letters. It was my father's private record of offshore transactions. He had hidden it in the one place he thought I would never look. I realized now why he wanted the conservatorship so badly. He needed legal access to the Historical Society's restricted vaults. He was using me to reach his own crimes. We drove through the rain toward the City Historical Society. The old stone building loomed like a fortress in the mist. I used my master key to enter through the side door. The air inside was still and smelled of ancient paper. My objective was simple. I had to retrieve the black book before the police arrived with a warrant. I led Miranda through the maze of shelves toward the restricted basement level. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward us like a grasping hand. I found the box labeled Frost Family Correspondence. My heart hammered against my ribs as I lifted the lid. The black leather ledger sat right on top, looking deceptively ordinary. I flipped it open to find my own forged signature on every second page. He had been using my name to move money for years. This was the proof Miranda needed to end the war permanently. I tucked the book into my bag and turned to leave. A flashlight beam hit my face. Put the bag down. Hadley, a voice commanded from the dark. It was not a police officer. It was Asher, standing by the rows of archive boxes. He looked exhausted. His expensive coat soaked through by the storm. He held a heavy master key that matched my own. My father had given him his own copy years ago. He was not here to help me. He was here to finish the job he had started in the alleyway. The betrayal felt like ice. Asher took a step forward, his eyes fixed on the bag. He explained that our father had promised to pay off his debts if he found the ledger. He didn't care about the forgery or the fraud. He only cared about the numbers. I realized then that my brother was more like our parents than I had ever wanted to believe. He reached for the bag, but Miranda stepped between us. She held out her phone. The police were already in the lobby upstairs. Asher did not move when the sirens began to wail outside the heavy stone walls. The flashlight in his hand trembled, casting jagged shadows across the rows of archival boxes. He looked smaller in the dim basement light, a desperate boy trapped in a man's tailored suit. My hand tightened on the strap of the bag containing the black ledger. This book was my shield and his death sentence. We stood in a silent standoff between history and the cold reality of greed. "Give me the book, Hadley," Asher whispered. His voice was cracked and hollow. He explained that our father's creditors were not just banks. Dangerous men were knocking on his door at night. I saw the genuine terror in his eyes. A fear that transcended legal filings or courtrooms. He wasn't just a pawn, he was a hostage to our father's reckless gambles. I felt a sharp pang of pity. It was quickly replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. He had chosen his side. Miranda stood like a statue beside me, her phone still glowing in the dark. She did not look at Asher. Her focus remained on the narrow stairwell leading to the lobby. We could hear the heavy rhythmic thud of boots on the floorboards above us. The police were searching for the documents Vance had reported stolen. They did not know the real crime was buried right here in my hands. Every second felt like a heartbeat, thumping against the stagnant archive air. I opened the bag and pulled out the ledger, just enough for Asher to see the spine. He lunged forward, but I stepped back into the shadows of the shelves. The archival boxes formed a maze that I knew by heart. I had spent years memorizing every corner of this basement. He tripped over a heavy rolling cart, the flashlight clattering to the concrete floor. The beam rolled away, illuminating a row of dust-covered jars and ancient, yellowed blueprints. The cart hit the metal shelving with a deafening ring. Upstairs, the heavy footsteps stopped. A voice shouted for a team to check the basement access points. The pressure in the room became a physical weight. I had to reach the elevator before they cut off the power. I looked at Asher, who was scrambling to his feet in the dark. He looked pathetic and lost. I realized he didn't even know what was actually written inside the black leather book. I reached the freight elevator and slammed the gate shut, just as Asher lunged again. The metal mesh rattled under his weight. I pulled the heavy lever, and the ancient motor groaned to life. As we began to descend further into the utility basement, I saw Asher's face through the moving gate. He wasn't angry anymore. He looked defeated. He knew that once this book reached the light of day, the Frost family legacy would finally burn. The elevator stopped with a bone, jarring jolt in the lowest level of the building. This was the boiler room. A place of heat and hissing steam. Miranda adjusted her glasses and checked her watch. We had a narrow window to exit through the cold chute. It led directly to the alley where her car was parked. I felt the heat of the pipes radiating through my navy dress. We moved toward the small iron door at the far wall. "You can't hide it forever." Asher's voice echoed down the elevator shaft above us. He sounded distant, like a ghost haunting the stone foundation. I ignored him and focused on the rusted bolts of the exit hatch. My knuckles were raw and bleeding from the struggle in the garage. I didn't care about the pain. I only cared about the truth. We pushed the door open and crawled out into the cold, wet night air of the city. We reached Miranda's sedan just as a second wave of police cruisers pulled into the main lot. They were too late. I climbed into the passenger seat and clutched the bag to my chest. Miranda started the engine and pulled away, without turning on the headlights. We were halfway to her office when she finally spoke. Her voice was strangely quiet. She told me that the police search at my home had actually found something. It wasn't archival documents. The sedan cut through the heavy rain like a silent predator. Miranda gripped the wheel, while her knuckles turned a sharp, bloodless white. I clutched the bag containing the black ledger to my chest. My heart hammered against my ribs with the force of a trapped bird. She kept her eyes on the dark road ahead. She told me the police found a secret wall safe in my bedroom. I had lived there for years and never knew it existed. My father had truly planned for every single possibility. My mind raced through the layout of my quiet apartment. I thought of the antique headboard and the floral wallpaper. Everything I owned was a facade for my father's hidden architecture. He had used my home as a secondary vault for his most dangerous secrets. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The realization was a physical blow to my gut. He didn't just want my money or my car. He needed to recover the contents of that safe before the court found them. I was his unwitting accomplice. As Miranda pulled into a secluded parking garage downtown. The concrete walls were damp and smelled of exhaust. She turned off the engine and finally looked at me. Her expression was a mix of grim pity and cold calculation. She explained that the police found an unregistered firearm inside the wall safe. It was linked to a cold case from my father's early law career. The frame-up was complete. He was going to sacrifice my life to bury his own bloody history. I stood on the edge of a cliff. We needed to act before the morning headlines broke. My objective was to hand the ledger to the one person my father couldn't buy. That person was Judge Winslow. He was already overseeing the inquiry into the bad faith petition. If he saw the forgeries in the ledger, the criminal case against me would evaporate. But the courthouse was currently swarming with police and private security. We were fugitives in a city owned by the Frost name. I looked at the black book in my lap. It felt like lead. I opened the bag and pulled out the ledger again. I needed to see the firearm's serial number if it was listed. I flipped to the back pages with shaking fingers. There it was. A detailed log of untraceable assets including a specific caliber pistol. My father had kept a meticulous record of his own crimes to use as leverage against others. He was a monster who documented his own teeth. I showed the entry to Miranda. She nodded slowly. This was the key to our survival. We had the map of his rot. The rain turned into a blinding downpour as we left the garage. We decided to approach the courthouse through the underground tunnels. These paths were used by maintenance crews and high-level officials. I knew the service entrances from my research on the city's architectural history. We moved through the humid darkness of the steam tunnels. The pipes hissed like angry snakes around us. Every echo sounded like a footstep. My boots splashed in shallow puddles of oily water. We were running out of time before the warrant was issued. We reached a heavy steel door marked Level B4. Used my master key from the Historical Society. It worked with a satisfying click. We were beneath the courthouse now. I could feel the weight of the justice system above us. My knuckles were raw and my navy dress was ruined by soot. I didn't care about the appearance. I only cared about the leverage. We found the service elevator and pressed the button for the judge's chambers. The motor groaned into life. We were rising toward the final confrontation of my life. The elevator doors opened into a plush, carpeted hallway. It was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. We moved toward Judge Winslow's private office. The lights were still on. He was a man who worked late into the night. My heart jumped when I saw a shadow move behind the frosted glass. I stepped forward and knocked firmly. The door opened to reveal the judge. He looked tired and surprised to see us in such a state. He didn't call security. He simply stepped aside. "Miss Frost, you look like you have been through a war," he said. His voice was a calm anchor in the chaos. I placed the black ledger on his mahogany desk. I told him about the safe and the firearm. I showed him the forged signatures that spanned a decade. He put on his glasses and began to read. The silence in the room was absolute. I watched his face turn from professional curiosity to deep, burning anger. He realized the scale of the deception. The Frost legacy was finally coming to an end. The judge reached for his telephone and dialed a direct line. He wasn't calling the police. He was calling the state attorney general. He explained that he had evidence of systemic fraud and capital crimes. I sat in a leather chair and felt the exhaustion finally take hold. My hands stopped shaking. The truth was out of my bag and on the desk. Miranda stood by the window, watching the street below. She saw the flashing lights of a dozen cruisers. They were not here for us this time. The Attorney General arrived 20 minutes later with a team of investigators. They treated the ledger like a holy relic. I gave a formal statement that lasted until the sun began to rise. They confirmed the firearm in my apartment safe was planted. The serial number matched the entry in my father's log perfectly. The frame-up had backfired with spectacular precision. I was no longer a suspect. I was the key witness in the biggest corruption case in the state's history. I felt a strange sense of peace. As I left the courthouse, the morning air felt cold and sweet. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets clean and shimmering. I saw my father being led into the building in handcuffs. He looked old and broken without his expensive suit and his pride. He didn't look at me as he passed. He was staring at the ground. My mother followed behind him, her face a mask of silent terror. The performance was over. The theater had burned down. I realized I didn't hate them. I felt nothing at all. I walked to the curb where Miranda was waiting with her car. She looked at me and gave a single, satisfied nod. We had won the war, but the cost was visible in the mirror. I had lost a family but gained my own soul. She asked me where I wanted to go now. I thought of my apartment, my Mustang, and the quiet archives. I thought of the future I had built with my own bloodied hands. I told her to take me home. Then my phone buzzed with a message from Asher. The message from Asher was a single, cryptic sentence. He told me to check the trunk of the Mustang before the police seized the garage. I stared at the glowing screen while the car hummed toward my apartment. Miranda saw my face change and tightened her grip on the wheel. She knew my brother was a dangerous variable in our fragile victory. I realized the war was far from over. There was one final secret buried in the grease of my sanctuary. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. We turned back toward the industrial district. The garage door was still dented from the previous night's struggle. No yellow tape barred the entrance yet. I jumped out before Miranda fully stopped the car. The scent of motor oil and cold metal greeted me like a grim warning. I reached for the latch on the forest green trunk with shaking fingers. This car was my soul, but my father had turned it into a tomb. I clicked the mechanism open. The light from the ceiling flickered as the heavy lid rose. I expected more money or perhaps another weapon. I was entirely wrong. Inside the spare tire well sat a small, waterproof plastic case. I pulled it out and felt the weight of something dense and electronic. Miranda stood at the threshold, her eyes scanning the dark alleyway for headlights. I flipped the latches on the box to reveal a high-grade digital recording device and several flash drives. My father had not just documented his own crimes in the ledger. He had recorded his clients, his partners, and the very politicians who protected him. This was the insurance policy that kept the Frost name untouchable. He was holding the city hostage. I realized why Asher had sent the text. He wasn't trying to help me. He was trying to save himself from the fallout. If I turned this in, every powerful hand that once shook my father's would be severed. The pressure shifted from a family dispute to a systemic collapse. I looked at the drives and saw labels with names I recognized from the morning news. These were the men who decided which buildings went up and which lives went down. My father's greed was the tip of a much larger, sharper spear. I felt sick. The sounds of gravel crunching outside made me freeze. A black SUV pulled into the alley, blocking our only exit path. Two men stepped out, their suits sharp and their faces entirely anonymous. They didn't look like police or the clumsy guards from before. These were the fixers. The men who made problems disappear before they reached a courtroom. I clutched the plastic case to my chest. Miranda reached into her bag, her posture stiffening. We were standing in the center of a target. The quiet archives felt like a million miles away. "Give us the box, Hadley," the taller man said. His voice was as flat as a dial tone. He didn't move toward me, which made the threat feel even more inevitable. He explained that my father was already talking to the feds about the ledger. But these drives were different. They were the bridge between the law and the shadows. If they vanished, my father would take the fall alone, and the city would remain stable. It was an offer of peace through erasure. I looked at the dark forest green paint of my car. My rebellion was at stake. Miranda stepped forward, her lawyer's mask replaced by something feral. She told them the drives were already being uploaded to a remote server. It was a bluff, but a brilliant one. The men hesitated, their eyes flickering to each other in the dim light. I saw the power balance tilt in that second of doubt. They didn't know how much I had learned from my years in the archives. I knew how to preserve evidence so it could never be destroyed. I stepped toward the back of the garage, near the heavy iron workbench. I reached for a heavy canister greaser and held it over the open drives. It was a desperate move, but it showed them I was willing to burn it all down. "One spark and your stability is gone," I whispered. My voice didn't shake. I saw the tall man's hand move toward his jacket. Then, a sharp, metallic click echoed from the rafters above us. It was the sound of a round being chambered. A red laser dot appeared on the tall man's chest. Someone else was watching our war from the darkness. A shadow dropped from the mezzanine level. It was Asher, holding a tactical rifle with practiced ease. He didn't look like the golden child anymore. He looked like a man who had finally chosen a side. "Step back from my sister," he commanded. His voice was cold and steady. The fixers looked up, realizing they were caught in a crossfire. They hadn't planned for a second frost with nothing left to lose. The tension in the garage was a physical weight. I didn't know if Asher would pull the trigger or join them. Asher gestured for the fixers to put their hands on the SUV. They complied, their faces masks of silent fury. They knew the game had changed. My brother walked toward me, his eyes never leaving the anonymous men. He took the plastic case from my hands with a gentle tug. I wanted to scream, to run, to fight him. But he simply handed the box to Miranda. "Get this to Winslow," he said. "I'll hold them here until you're clear." He was sacrificing his freedom to fix the bridge he had broken. Miranda didn't waste a second. She grabbed my hand and pulled me toward her car. We scrambled into the seats, and she reversed the sedan with a violent screech. I looked back through the rear window as we sped out of the alley. I saw Asher standing at the garage entrance, his rifle leveled at the SUV. He looked like a statue against the industrial rust. He was the guardian of the secrets he had almost used to destroy me. We left him behind in the shadows of the unit. The sirens were finally getting louder. We reached the courthouse as the first light of dawn touched the stone pillars. Judge Winslow was waiting at the side entrance, surrounded by federal marshals. We handed over the drives in the lobby. The air felt charged with the coming storm. The judge looked at the labels and his face went pale. He realized he was holding the keys to the city's prison. "This is enough to change everything," he whispered. I sat on a stone bench and watched the drives disappear into a secure evidence bag. It was finally out of my hands. The morning headlines didn't mention the fixers or the garage. They focused on the arrests of 3 city council members and a state senator. My father's name was buried in the middle of a list of conspirators. The Frost legacy wasn't just ending. It was being erased by the very truth it tried to hide. I walked out of the courthouse alone. Miranda had stayed to handle the filings. My phone buzzed again. It was a picture from Asher. He was sitting in the driver's seat of the Mustang, the keys in his hand. The cool morning air tasted like wet pavement and redemption. I stood on the courthouse steps, while the sun finally broke through the gray haze. Miranda remained inside to finalize the immunity deals for my brother. Asher had saved us, but he was still a Frost. The police tape around my garage would eventually be removed. I looked at the picture on my phone again. Asher was in my Mustang. He wasn't stealing it. He was guarding the only honest thing left in our family. I walked toward my apartment with a heavy, rhythmic stride. My ruined navy dress fluttered in the breeze. People passed me without knowing I had just dismantled a dynasty. The secret safe in my bedroom wall sat empty now. Investigators had taken every scrap of evidence. I realized I didn't want to live there anymore. That space was a box built by a ghost. I needed a home that didn't have hidden compartments. I wanted a life that was entirely on the surface. The lobby of my building was quiet and smelled of lemon polish. I didn't check my mailbox. I didn't want any more official envelopes. I reached my floor and found a small bouquet of wildflowers outside my door. There was no card. But I knew the sender. Mrs. Gable had always supported my quiet strength. She understood that a library wasn't just for books. It was a place for people to find their own voices. I pulled the flowers into my arms. Inside, the silence was different. It wasn't the heavy quiet of a fortress under siege. It was the peaceful stillness of a house that belonged to me. I sat in my new armchair and looked at the herb garden. The mint was growing toward the light. I realized the lie was finally dead. My value was not a reflection of my parents' success. It was a solid fact I had built myself. I was Hadley Frost. I was competent. I was finally free. Asher called an hour later from a secure facility. His voice sounded tired but strangely clear. He told me the feds were interested in the politician on Drive 4. He was trading his knowledge for a clean slate. He didn't ask for money or a place to stay. He just asked if I would visit him. I hesitated, then I said yes. We were two survivors of a sunken ship. We had a long way to go to reach the shore. I spent the afternoon packing a single suitcase. I wasn't running away this time. I was choosing a new direction. I left the silver oak leaf pendant on the kitchen table for the next tenant. It was a beautiful artifact, but it belonged to a history I was closing. I took my bank records and the keys to the Mustang. My archives were at the museum now. My future was on the open road. I felt the weight of the past lift. The garage was silent when I returned to retrieve my car. The black SUV and the fixers were gone. Asher had left the keys under the driver's side floor mat. I climbed in and felt the familiar scent of old leather and oil. I turned the ignition, and the engine roared to life. The vibration was a heartbeat through the floorboards. I backed out into the sun. I didn't look at the dented door. I focused on the clear blue horizon. I drove out of the city toward the river valley. The wind whipped through the open windows. I pushed the pedal down, and the 65 Mustang responded with pure, mechanical joy. I wasn't an archivist or a target or a victim. I was a woman who owned her own story. The road ahead was long and winding. I didn't need a map. I just needed the wheel in my hands. I laughed out loud into the rush of the air.